In a bizarre turn of events, a math teacher at a Miami school inadvertently spooked 9 and 10-year-old students by showing them a horror-themed Winnie the Pooh movie, leaving parents flabbergasted. The film, titled Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, features the beloved characters Pooh and Piglet seeking revenge after Christopher Robin goes off to college. While the teacher reportedly didn't hit the brakes despite the kids pleading to stop the movie, the school's principal has taken steps to address the situation and ensure students' well-being. Pooh, you've never been this unbearably scaring. This article is from Sky News, published October 12th, 2023.
Well, I can't barely bear it myself.
Boy, back to back on the same pun there. Wow. Okay. All right. That's where we're going tonight. I'm ready.
Yes. Well, it is All Howells Eve this time, so it makes sense for us to do that. But Kelley Scott, I am curious to know what your take on this is.
Sure. I'd be happy to give you my take on that. But first, I want to show you this wonderful piece of bullshit that I harvested myself way back in 1907 in northern Alberta. And boy, it's just a marvelous specimen. I just wanted to bring that out there. But my first impression was, what the heck is this teacher thinking? I mean, come on. The name of the school was the Academy of Innovative Education, but I think this is pushing it maybe a little bit here. But beyond my initial befuddlement, I have three main things that I wanted to look at for this particular story. First of all, the students, right? They're the number one thing we should be concerned about in this situation, the students. But then we also want to look at the perspective of the teacher. And then finally, how do we relate this to an atheist, secular humanist viewpoint? So first, the students. What the article says is, we are actively monitoring the students, and our mental health counselor and principal have already met with those students who have expressed concerns. That was from the school principal. And well, that's fine. But, what is the potential harm here? I found an article written by a clinical psychotherapist. His name is Dr. John Crimmins, and he wrote on the psychological effects of horror movies on teens. Now, we're talking about 9 and 10-year-olds in this story. And so adjust these comments accordingly. He found that exposure to horror movies can trigger anxiety, fear, and trauma in some teens, especially those who are sensitive or vulnerable or that have experienced violence in the past. Okay, so that's kind of the main worry there. They also found that some teenagers can learn how to deal with stress and build resilience by watching a good horror movie. This is because it gives them a safe and controlled way to feel fear and anxiety. And the third point from Dr. Crimmins was developmental factors such as age, cognitive ability, emotional maturity. All of these things can impact a teen's readiness to watch horror movies, and that parents should consider all of these factors. Now, again, these are all for teens. We're talking about 9 and 10-year-olds. So I think what we see there is, despite the fact that we have the potential for growth here, right? Dealing with like Nietzsche said, right? Whatever doesn't kill you only makes you stronger. Now there is the potential for that happening here, but we don't know what these kids' backgrounds. We don't know how sensitive they are to violence. We don't know how anxious they might be. We don't know if they've experienced violence in the past. And for me, that was the big red flag there. So there is a potential for harming students here. Cynthia, I'm sorry, M. Gideon, she, her. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I am really wanting to make sure that everybody else has like a say before I really get into my thoughts. So, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and just throw it over to Jason Jellicoe Cat real quick. So you can go ahead and give your thought.
Well, I think what Kelley was saying was really on point. When you look at people who have been primed to believe scary things like hell and God's watching you while you sleep, and there's this being that knows everything you think, and you get good things and bad things because of how you behave and act, it primes you to not be able to differentiate between, let's say, what's reality and what's not reality. So in a situation like this, if you have like my child has been around horror themed Halloween movies, grew up in tattoo shops. She's pretty, I wouldn't say desensitized, but understands the difference between make believe and reality.
Maybe even at this very moment is experience.
maybe even this very, yeah. So the thing is that this is an opportunity, I believe, to grow and to learn. And the thing that makes me nervous is that this teacher, depending on the social environment around there, this teacher could become a target for something that could have very easily just been a mistake. It's at a charter school. It's a small school. People know each other. You get comfortable. I could see a situation to where, hey, y'all put something on. I'm going to go run and do this thing. And then comes to find out the thing that these kids decided to put on, not the best thing. I was writing my notes while watching it. I figured I'd do some investigation. And in a matter of the first 8 minutes, spoiler alert, Christopher Robin's wife gets choked to death by a 7-foot tall Winnie the Pooh using a rusty chain in a hut made out of garbage. So, yeah, and then they said that it went on for about 20 minutes. I'm pretty sure the teacher might have been in the restroom or on a phone call. So, yeah, I think it's real sad to see what would happen or what's going to happen if the social environment isn't one of understanding and is one of those too religious. Ramesses Jr., how do you feel about this?
Well, I think that things are not going to be the same in 100 Acre Wood anymore. I appreciate the spoiler. If I'm Christopher Robin, I'm sorry, Pooh, but you're just not my homie anymore. Not after you took
not
out
at
my
all.
wife.
Not at all.
Murder is what Tiggers do best, right?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. I do have a problem with that, with what took place in this classroom. And it's really the easy, simple reason that it wasn't math that was being taught. You know, whether it's private or public, it's tax dollars or probably very high tuition that's going toward keeping these kids engaged and making sure that they're learning, and they weren't. And that's really problematic for several reasons. Well, of course, if I'm paying for my kid to want to learn and I want what's best for my kid, then I want that time used wisely, right? So that is one aspect. Two, I don't think it's really up to the teachers to decide that kind of thing, you know, as there's a certain kind of social contract we have with teachers in the classroom, and they're there to care for our children, and the, you know, the reciprocation is that they're going to educate them as well. But I do want to actually connect this to atheism, to Kelley's point, and that is, you know, these kinds of acts that when teachers go rogue like this, and I do have a problem with rogue teachers. This is what emboldens the very people that want to enact laws that take the power away from teachers and really take the ability for schools to be governed properly away from the actual school. And instead we start to see this very right-wing agenda creep into the school because they love to target teachers, and all they need is an excuse to say, all right, it's time to put God back in classrooms, right?
Yep.
And that's how we end up with we end up with these various states and these various laws across these states that are echoing each other, where teachers are required to disclose things that are normally protected by law, or teachers have to report things to parents that normally is just not a reasonable expectations. Teachers can be fired for, you know, calling kids by a name that they don't want. Books have to be banned. I mean, it goes on. And so this is dangerous for that reason. And I think that goes into the kind of atheist thing that Kelley brought up. But yeah, so those are the problems I have with it. And on my first point, you know, we have to really remember that this country in general, our math scores are among the lowest of developed countries for the last 20 years. And that's according to the Organization for Economic and Cooperative Development. And so that is a viable source and something to think about when we, you know, start considering what is a teacher supposed to really be doing. And I'm not trying to bash teachers. Teachers are underpaid, overqualified, and we love our teachers. So I'm going to end there. Yeah. So Moff, What are your thoughts on that?
The mobster.
Yeah.
Well, after I go to the Mandalorian planet to go ahead and get my ore, I did want to. I did want to kind of expand on this whole responsibility of not only teachers but also parents. But let's go to teachers first. And Scott, Kelley, I'm coming to you because you are an educator. You actually teach math. So yeah, so like, what are some of the steps that should be taken to ensure that teachers are adequately not only trained and informed about the content that they choose to show to students, especially in a diverse and age-sensitive educational environment?
Well, first of all, I'll just say that I had no problem when I showed Winnie the Pooh blood and honey in my classroom last week. So, they had no trouble whatsoever. I'm kidding, of course. Although my students are adults, they're not 9 and 10-year-olds. But yes, there is, teachers do have a responsibility for the care and the well-being of the students. And, if their district is anything like the district that I was initially employed in, they do have in-services and they do have trainings on appropriate ways of dealing with kids regarding this type of thing. And just to touch on a point Ramesses Jr. brought up, I think that there is some value. I do understand, why weren't they doing math? That is a concern, but there is also value in social bonding, and maybe the students had earned a break or something, and so there are. While I agree with you that I think that it's easy for a teacher to put in a movie and walk away, or to do that kind of thing, think of it as a day off, and so a thoughtful teacher would try to have an activity that was fun and educational. However. So teachers do go through some kind of training usually, but I looked on lawyers.com to see what the legal expectation is, and I found an article from the legal editor there. His name is E.A. Jelton, and he had this to say: teachers have a legal duty to supervise students in the same way that a sensible, careful parent would do in a similar circumstances. If students are hurt because of negligent supervision, their parents might be able to pursue a personal injury lawsuit against the school. So we know that these types of things can harm students. They say that it can also build them up, but there's a real risk there of harmful, especially students that have experienced violence in the past. But this really nails it down and points out that there is a legal obligation, and the phrase that he used here is very clear, that a sensible, careful parent would do in similar circumstances. And so that's kind of the guideline, I think. Now, what is sensible and careful? That can vary from student to student, district to district, state to state. But I think there are cutoff points that reasonable people can agree on. There has been cases where they've shown that teachers or school districts can get sued, and it has happened from if the school was neglectful. That's kind of the thing there too. If they fail to provide safeguards for these students, and so it can happen. So it is something to be concerned about. Moth G MG.
M to the G to the.
Yes.
I thought you heard. That you made some like really good points, especially when you're talking about the responsibilities of teachers. But what about the responsibilities of parents? Ramesses Jr. and Jason Voorhees, the Jellicoe cat, you guys are both parents, and I'm just curious to know from you two. We're going to start with you, Pharaoh. Before you do that, make sure you let it be written and then let it be done. What role should the parents actually play in overseeing materials and content used in their children's education? What do you think?
Well, I have many children, hundreds, and when it gets pretty difficult. But for more normal families, who have kids that they have to be responsible for. Seriously, though, I think that there is an understanding that needs to be established. a course syllabus, permission slips, constant involvement with the parent and the teacher could all be ways that the parent can be involved, but not take the power out of the teacher's hands. I think something like this, and to Scott's point earlier, there is an appropriate place to do things that are a little bit outside of the box, or maybe not with the curriculum. I have no problem with innovative learning, as the namesake for this school would suggest, but something like this, well, that detracts from the expectation. So I think in order to manage that expectation and make sure we're on the same page, make sure a teacher doesn't get jaded or a parent doesn't get, too far from being in the know of what their kids are being exposed to, maybe some coordination. I think in the last 3 schools that my daughter has been in, we've had access to a website where we can see, what assignments are coming up, what's due, what's late, what the goal for learning is. And that is, if that's not standardized already, I would say that that's a good path forward if we wanted to make that standardized.
That's key. That's key. I think communication is an important factor in this kind of thing.
Sure.
Yep. I agree.
Yeah,
What
it's over
about
to you,
Jellicoe?
Jason.
Yeah, go ahead, Jellicoe.
So, like I mentioned before about my kiddo, they've been exposed to mature subject matter. I guess what because mature subject matter for most of their life. Owned a couple tattoo shops, and we like to listen to heavy metal and horror movies, serial killer podcasts, things like that. So if my kid were to see that, she doesn't like watching gore, but she likes watching like animes like Demon Slayer, and there's blood and guts and decapitations, and 9-10-year-old kids are watching that. So for me, the fact that this is even I'm not trying to be insensitive, I'm really not, but I'm thinking about just the kids in her grade school in 4th grade were wearing Deadpool backpacks. I mean, come on, 3rd grade even, so it's. And this Winnie the Pooh movie didn't even have any sex stuff in it. Like, and the gore was even very dark and like low budget. I mean, it really wasn't a big deal. So for this to be a news article seems kind of agenda based. That's why it's kind of smelly to me. I read a CBS news article on this as well. And they had said something like private schools and charter schools generally don't, vet their teachers and blah, blah, blah. And we checked, we source or fact checked it earlier before the show, and that's not the case. So it seems like they're trying to poison the well in order to demonize a person. And it's just silly to me because again, I think what you guys are saying, communication is key, but it's communication with your child or with somebody that you are the caretaker of, that's somebody who depends on you to understand the world and morality and what's real and what's not. And I know in my daughter's case that they would be able to handle it. And I would be able to talk to the person who was overseeing my kid, their student. And if they were reasonable and said, holy shit, I was out, I wasn't watching. Okay, cool. Just please don't fuck up again. It's not like they harmed my child purposely. And it's not like somebody was forcing them to watch it, So it's interesting that this is even an article, and it does seem inflammatory. But I'll throw it back to you, MG, and you can go ahead and close this out for us.
Well, before I did, I actually just had one more question to the educator / geologist on the panel. So this incident, as we already discussed, actually took place at the Academy of Innovative Education, which actually serves children from all the way from like kindergarten, I believe, or preschool, all the way to age 17. So this is like an organization that's actually, or a school rather, that's, well, a school is an organization, that's actually educating children from the time that they leave their parents' home, as far as like going into an academic environment, all the way until it's possibly time for them to even go to college. So how can educational institutions adapt their approach to being age appropriate, and actually making sure the age appropriate content is available and in the classrooms as the students grow rather?
Well, like I said, before, I think communication is very important. Keeping those avenues of communication open, and having parents talk to the teachers, as well as parents communicating with the administration. I think that's really it. We do need to be cautious. Jason V, I love you to death, but um, your experience with your kids is awesome, and I know that you're providing them a variety of exposure to a
Yep.
variety of things, but there might be parents that maybe can't devote that much time to their kids, or maybe, like I said before, there might be some situations where students have had
Mhm.
violence in their past, and so they
Yep.
might be there might be some PTSD issues, there might be some trust issues, there might be things like sleeping issues, and things like that. And so I value your experience that you shared with us.
Mhm.
But I think that's part of the larger picture. And so I think uh, we can solve that, like I said, with communication. If we keep communication open, then we can hear opinions come in. We can have, and even then we need to, I think, 9 and 10-year-olds with I think this movie was not rated in the US, but I saw that it was rated 18 plus in Britain. And so it wasn't 4 pump jack-o'-lanterns on the Jason scale, but there were some parts in there that ticked some of the boxes. And so
Yep.
I think a thoughtful and open and transparent approach is the best way to go, with including feedback from parents with all opinions across the whole spectrum.
Yeah, I agree, because like, even just like reading this article, and even though like my child is young, I can definitely understand how 9-year-olds and 10-year-olds watching this movie could possibly get triggered, especially to your point, Kelly Scott, that depending on what happens in their background, or if they have been exposed to trauma or violence, this could be triggering. So I think that it's important as an educator to be more responsible with the content that you actually are showing to children, and making sure that it is age appropriate. And also, being a former educator myself, I would deviate from lesson plans in order to give kids a break, but it still was within the context of what the subject matter was. And I think that that's something that any teacher has to be conscious of. And also, parents should know what's going on in the school, but we want to make sure that these particular incidents don't lead into uh, crazy parents running to their school board screaming about, they're trying to indoctrinate my children into atheism of watching Winnie the Pooh gore and all this other stuff. Like, we already have that problem, especially in Florida. We really don't need in an issue going forward, with this even being ramped up as with book bannings and things of that nature. But geologists, I know that you did wanted to give a bit more about linking to atheism. Could you please give your thoughts about
Sure.
that?
Yeah. I just want to attack this on the end here. No,
Mhm.
Ramesses had mentioned already that this could be like an intentional trigger, right? It could be an
Mhm.
intent, pushing the limits, finding out
Yep.
where the limits are, looking for an excuse to, you know, what am I the word I'm looking for, to
Which
pile on more regulation. There we go.
Yeah,
Yep.
Woof, boy,
exactly.
I'm glad I got that out.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
all good.
but I was able to find a possible link. Now this is conjecture, but I remember back to a research study that we featured on the nonprofits, maybe a year or so ago, where they looked at 5 and 6-year-olds, and they compared children that were raised in a religious environment, either religious family and or at a religious school, versus students that were raised in a more secular environment. And they found that, and I'll try to put the link for the study in the show notes if anybody wants to look into it.
Mhm.
But they found that the students with the religious upbringing had more difficulty differentiating between fact and fiction when hearing
Yep.
stories. So they told them real stories that were factual with ordinary events. They told them religious stories with extraordinary events, and then they also told non-religious stories that also had extraordinary events like magic and superpowers and stuff like that. And so they found that the religious students, or the religious children, couldn't differentiate between actual, people and actual events versus fictional in both of the religious stories and in the non-religious extraordinary stories. So
Mm.
so
That's
in this
crazy.
case, I'd be curious to see if the secular students in this person's class maybe were a little better able to deal with this this depiction of violence, better able to realize that it's fictional and that kind of thing, compared to the religious students. I don't know. It's just conjecture on my part, but I thought it was an interesting tack.
I get that, Kelley Scott, and but I will say this. What's not conjecture? More for the nonprofit. So click here.